Hey guys, we'll be looking at the 1920s, the Great Depression, and how that impacted Pennsylvania, and then also the New Deal, and then Gifford Pinchot's Little New Deal. By the end, you should know a little bit more about the 1920s. You should also be able to identify why a big event like the Great Depression happened, what caused it, and what were its impacts. And last, we will look at some of the government solutions to the Great Depression, such as the New Deal, and then our governor's Little New Deal. So let's start with the bell ringer questions. 1. What do you know about the 1920s? The other question is, should government be responsible for helping citizens out in a depression? What do you think? Some of you did very well explaining your answers, and then some of you, it was very short, and then I had to comment again to ask you, what did you exactly mean by that? Or can you explain that, or can you give an example? To get started, let's think about what's going on in Pennsylvania around this time. Roles are changing, women are getting jobs, they are going to college. Many activists in Pennsylvania and other states are fighting for women to have equal opportunities. One of those opportunities being able to vote, and in 1919 they would be able to vote. We have some of the richest people in our history living at this time. We have all this innovation in technology. We're still mass producing so many products and making a ton of money off so many countries, exporting across the world. It's still a time for progressives trying to make change in the law and in business practices. It's still a time where we're feeling the impacts from the failed Reconstruction era, and race relations are still a problem. People are still fighting for civil rights. This is when we also get the re-emergence of the KKK again. At this time, we did just get done fighting a world war. We do have more power and a better reputation on the world stage at this point. We still are meddling south of the border and have some armed interventions in some countries in Latin America. Schools and education are becoming more important and more of a norm. Transportation is expanding. We are starting to pave roads. More and more people do have automobiles. In the 1920s, air travel became very popular. Same with movie theaters. We get more and more leisurely activities for people. And they do have more free time. They do have more money. They have a safer work environment. This is a time when we do start to get sports stars and even celebrities. And Pennsylvania is shifting from an agricultural giant to an industrial one. So many businesses for so many products are offering credit. At this time of great industrial growth, we also have great inequality, one of the worst in our history. We also have something of a cultural civil war. We have the youth growing up with different ideas than the older generation. They have more progressive ideas. They have more egalitarian ideas. People are more tolerant of immigrants, of African Americans. They're changing women's roles. They are trying and then succeeding in banning alcohol. They're trying to improve families and take care of people. They're trying to lessen the gap between income inequality. There's a battle between evolution and creationism. And these are all topics of the cultural battlefield at this time. You can say a lot of that sounds like today. One last thing is that we have laissez-faire economics. This type of economics basically says that the government is going to leave their hands off of what happens. We'll let the market and the consumers dictate it. And that sounds great, and that's something that Adam Smith would agree to. The only issue is sometimes things get too big and it can be a danger. That's why our government would break up some trusts. Many people just think of the stock market crash in 1929, but it's much more than that. You can also say the uneven distribution of wealth. This is reflected by 60% of people living below the poverty line. We can say there's many different reasons, such as gross inequality, an unhealthy consumer culture, overproduction in some industries, the stock market crash, the web of war debts. The US would help Germany, and Germany has to pay the US, and Germany has to pay the other allies, and the other allies have to pay us. We can also blame high tariffs, and another factor is even drought. This impacted more states out west, and it would even lead to dust storms, where these giant storms would just eat up houses and automobiles. This would even lead to an infestation of giant spiders and centipedes out there, which might lead a person to drink, but they couldn't because of prohibition. Probably one of the biggest reasons for the Depression had to do with the easy access to credit. A lot of this prosperity in the US, and Pennsylvania especially, was more of an illusion. Most families actually lived below the poverty line. Too many people made bad investments. That led to wasted capital, wasted money, and numerous economic losses across the board. Gradually at this time, wages would fall. For example, miners went from making 85 cents per hour to making 63 cents per hour on average. Banks were put under an extreme amount of stress. They didn't have a safety net. There wasn't any government regulation to make sure that things would be okay. So banks were failing. Businesses were going bankrupt. Many consumers defaulted on their loans. So many of our citizens wanted these nice houses in the suburbs, to get all these new appliances in the magazines, to get this new car. And when things were going downhill, they couldn't pay any of the stuff back. Our government government at this point would also issue high tariffs to other countries. A tariff is just a tax on a foreign good. When you do issue high tariffs on other countries for their goods, many times they do it right back. And because of some of these factors, our global trade would actually drop 30%. Many consumers relied on credit and installment buying. What it means is that you can pay some now, collect your good, and then every month or every quarter, you can pay another amount until it's paid off. They typically had interest rates that were extremely high, and sometimes even 16%. When you consider all these different causes and factors for the Great Depression, you have to realize that there's not like one certain day that it all just crashed and went bad. It was a relatively slow process that had to do with many different factors, and it worked slow like a cancer. At its peak in the nation, unemployment was something like 37%. However, in some Pennsylvania towns, our employment rate was as high as 80%. 1/6 of our nation's banks failed. Businesses would slow or even shut down. The value of land would decline. We couldn't fill houses. People would lose their jobs, their savings, even their homes. And this depression lasted for a while, well into the 30s. Many people in Pennsylvania were going hungry and they were homeless. And overall, Pennsylvania was probably one of the hardest hit by the Depression. You also have plenty of bootleggers and speakeasies in Pennsylvania. A bootlegger is essentially somebody making alcohol legally, and a speakeasy would just be the place that you would get it, since alcohol was banned by the 18th Amendment. Industrial production in Pennsylvania fell 50%. Specifically, coal production fell 50%, iron production fell 80%, and textile production would fall 60%. During the Depression, half of Pennsylvania's 16 and 17-year-olds actually dropped out of school. Pennsylvania had more families seeking relief from government than any other state. For many people in our state and even our country, they would have to provide goods for food. There are some accounts of lawlessness and theft in Pennsylvania. Sometimes people would have a common fear that their neighbors would break into their house and take some valuables to sell for food, or even steal some animals if you had any in your yard, such as chickens. During this time, oddly enough, life expectancy actually did go up. The increase was about 6.2 years, and life expectancy would go from 57 years to about 63 years. The people in Pennsylvania would protest, they would seek relief. In fact, one march of protesters included over 25,000, and they traveled from our state capital of Harrisburg all the way to Washington, D.C. At the same time where many people were seeking relief, there was also a rise in communism and socialism, especially in Pennsylvania. President FDR and our governor did a lot of the same things. FDR would pass the New Deal, and our governor would pass the Little New Deal. Essentially, he spent a lot of government money to try to create jobs and so many other things. It would provide direct relief to people, such as money. It would provide public works, and it would also help regulate banks, regulate businesses. It would create Social Security, and it would even recognize unions. There would be regulation on farming, and there would even be regulation on stocks and bonds. Our governor, Gifford Pinchot, he was big on many progressive ideals, such as conservation. He fought for women's right to vote, a minimum wage. He fought for workers' compensation, and he even fought for unions to be recognized so they could collectively bargain with employers. The governor would also cut wasteful spending, and he actually didn't even collect a salary. At the time of the Depression, he even helped 1 million unemployed workers. Under the governor's administration, they would work together to create jobs. These jobs included paving roads in Pennsylvania, building state parks, building reservoirs, and much more, especially to help our infrastructure. The whole idea of the Little New Deal was that the government can spend money now and then make it in the long term. If you provide these temporary jobs to workers, they're getting paid, their money's going back into the economy, they're surviving, they're happy, they're fixing our infrastructure, and then later we can make money based on that improved, let's say, transportation. Now that we built that highway, more and more people can drive from A to B to go make their money and to go spend their money. And overall, the New Deal would help us, but it wouldn't necessarily pull us out. A lot of historians even argue that we wouldn't necessarily be pulled out into the next world war. But regardless, at the end of this, Pennsylvania's landscape would totally be changed. There would be more highways, campgrounds, additional government buildings, airports, tunnels, bridges, public housing, courthouses, schools, parks, and even hydroelectric dams. There was even some jobs in the arts that would be provided, such as making sculptures. So overall, Pennsylvania would be transformed. The government in Pennsylvania and in the US would totally change by providing so many social goods. Now let's go over the review questions. 1. What were the causes of the Great Depression, and which cause do you think was the most important? 2. What were the impacts of the Great Depression? How did it change Pennsylvania? And 3. Can you explain some aspects of the New Deal or even the Little New Deal? Thank you so much, guys. Please leave your answers in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this. If you have any questions or feedback, just post it. See you guys. Bye.